Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, or welcome for the first time if you're coming here. This is my Cave of Cool Books. My name is Jeff, and today I just want to talk a little bit about a few, like a baker's dozen, a handful of miscellaneous adventure books. I have a lot of books that could be classed as adventure. I guess, there's adventure components to most fantasy. Certainly Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert E. Howard, adventure is their middle name basically, but I've already covered those in some bookshelf tours. I want to talk about a few miscellaneous titles here. And the first two I'm going to show are nonfiction. The rest will be fiction. So the first one is actually not a complete book. It's a fun little kind of excerpt from a longer work. And this is The Congo and the Cameroons by Mary Kingsley. This is a series of kind of, I guess I wouldn't call them chapbooks, but excerpted pieces published in these cool little thin paperbacks by Penguin Books around the 2007 range. This is excerpted from Travels in West Africa by Mary Kingsley, published in 1897, so a long time ago. And this is a series called Penguin's Great Journeys, and this is number 16 in the Penguin's Great Journeys series, and you'll see a list of some of the other ones. I don't know if they ever went beyond these 20 books, small paperbacks. This is roughly 114 pages or so. Interior flap has a nice map where she was adventuring around in Spanish Guinea and German Cameroon and French Congo and Belgian Congo. So it was back when it was kind of hotly contested area. I'll just read a little excerpt that they have here about Mary Kingsley. She sounds like quite a lady. The remarkable Mary Kingsley, 1862 to 1900, so she died quite young, sadly, made 3 journeys to Africa. In the first 2 journeys, she roamed around West and equatorial West Africa, from Sierra Leone to Angola. The second journey being particularly memorable for her travels through the rivers and forests of modern Gabon and her ascent of Mount Cameroon, then in the German colony of Cameroon. She developed through her experience both an overwhelming enthusiasm for Africa and a matching skepticism about European imperialism and missionary work. It was on her return from the second African journey that she wrote her best-selling Travels in West Africa in 1897. Her third and final journey to Africa resulted in her death, age 37, from enteric fever while working as a volunteer nurse in a hospital for Afrikaner POWs during the Boer War. So, a sadly curtailed life, but quite an adventurous one. Anyway, this also has, in the back flap, a kind of cool little map showing in the part of Africa where she predominantly adventured, right? Some interesting little mini books. I only have this one, but I remember going in some newer bookstore, probably Barnes & Noble or someplace equivalent, and finding this and thinking it was pretty cool. The other one I have to show today is a pocketbook edition of Kon-Tiki. So this book was about an expedition trying to prove that people could have crossed the Pacific on a raft. This was massively popular back in the day. It was first published in 1950 by Rand McNally, and then this pocketbook edition is the 28th printing from 1968. And I'll just read a little blurb on the back here. Kon-Tiki is the true story of a voyage hailed as one of the most fantastic feats of daring and courage of our generation. An international bestseller in English and 22 other languages, this account of an all but incredible adventure has won the highest critical praise. And basically, Thor Heyerdahl was a Norwegian, and he and 5 other guys traveled on this raft through all sorts of adventures. And, inside of the book has a map of their journey, basically, across the Pacific, from Peru to New Zealand. And that's quite a trip, of course. And the book has some, old black and white photos. This was made also into a documentary film. Look at that raft going across the high seas there. How scary must that have been, in some crazy waves and other things they encountered. And of course they stopped off along where they could, to replenish their supplies, etc. on some islands, going through Tahiti and the Cook Islands, etc. Anyway, cool book. I'm sure a lot of people are aware of this one. Definitely adventure in the full sense of the word. Okay, all right, now I'll turn to some fiction. So this one is by Ian Cameron, published in 1961. This is The Island at the Top of the World. This is an adventure up in the Arctic. Now this, as you can tell, Walt Disney Studios, this is a kind of tie-in to the movie that was made in the 60s there with David Hartman from, if you remember, any of you, the older people like myself might remember David Hartman as one of the hosts of Good Morning America, but in the 60s, he was an actor before he became a morning talk show host. And this one, again, it's used to be, and it looks like a junior high school library. Maybe someone typed it before it made its way to a used bookstore. And this is a Avon book. And originally it was apparently published as The Lost Ones. And this is a kind of, basically, I wouldn't hesitate to use the word lost race novel exactly, but it's, definitely a period adventure novel. A sea captain searches for his only son who disappeared while seeking the legendary whale's graveyard. But in his search, the brave captain finds a puzzle far stranger than his son's disappearance. Caught in the mysteries of a bizarre civilization, a remnant of the ancient Vikings, the captain must battle both a strange people and the defiant forces of nature in his harrowing trek across frozen wastes and raging seas. And of course, it's not only the captain, he has a couple of companions. And this one is a cool story. The Disney movie's okay. It's back when Disney was making live action adventure films, and some of them are quite fun. But this is not maybe one of the high points, but it's interesting. The book is far better. All right, another series that maybe goes into horror a little bit, horror adventure. And I know Nick at the Book Graveyard and his wife have been looking for this one. This is The Devil Rides Out by Dennis Wheatley. This is a Duc de Richelieu supernatural adventure. And some other ones that the Duc de Richelieu figures into are more straightforward adventures. This one is a Mandarin book. Has anyone ever seen a Mandarin? Mandarin horror, it's classified. So I guess technically it's classified as horror. Because in this one, a black magic story. In this one, the Duc de Richelieu and his pals fight against a devil-worshipping cult to rescue their friend Simon, who has become involved in this cult. Now, this is kind of back in the days where in England, when spiritualism was all the rage, and some people took it more seriously than others. And this one was first published in 1934 in Great Britain. This edition was published by Mandarin Paperbacks in 1996. And I can't recall quite where I got this. It seems to be pretty hard to find now, I suppose, other than maybe as an ebook. This one, let me just give you a little précis of the story on the back here. The dreadful power of the occult, the Duc de Richelieu and Rex von Ryn, that's his kind of studly American pal that were acquainted during the First World War, I believe, know instinctively that something bizarre has happened to Simon Aaron. Simon Aaron is their friend who has gone astray, falling under the influence of the evil Mokata. Why else would he fail his most trusted friends? The Duke has a suspicion where the answer lies, but nothing can prepare him or Van Ryn for the terrible confirmation of his fears. Their oldest friend has fallen prey to the forces of darkness through a powerful emissary of Satan, against whom all earthly faculties are useless. And then the Daily Telegraph apparently hailed the reviewer there, the best of its kind since Dracula. Anyway, I'm sure elements of this have not dated so well, but they made an excellent, Hammer Films made an excellent movie adaptation of this with Christopher Lee at his imperious best, starring as the Duc de Richelieu, and it was one of Christopher Lee's favorite films, perhaps his most favorite film he did for Hammer, and one of his favorite films overall, I think, of his horror and adventure films. That's a terrific movie, easily one of Hammer's best, and the book is more detailed, of course, than the movie. 320 pages of pretty small text. So that's a pretty cool one. Now I have another couple Wheatleys on ebook, but the other one I have on paperback is also a Duc de Richelieu adventure, and that's Strange Conflict. Now this one is set during World War II, so I believe this was published in 1941, when 1941, and this is a Ballantine printing. I believe this is Ballantine Books. Black Magic Story, over 1 million copies sold, it says on the front here. This little star. And nice, looks like Baphomet or some scary demon-looking thing. Strange Conflict is a story set in the Second World War featuring the Duc de Richelieu, who is faced with the problem of the utmost importance. What methods are the enemy using to discover the secret routes of the Atlantic convoys? His answer is at once bizarre and fantastic. The enemy are in touch with supernatural powers, which can only be overcome by those who dare to join battle with them on the astral plane. The Duke and his followers put this theory to the test and face the terrifying challenge from the powers of darkness, journeying to the island of Haiti, where, amid the horrors of voodoo and black magic, they confront their archenemy in bodily form. Pretty cool. Strange Conflict, Dennis Wheatley. Again, I suppose we could say it's more horror or supernatural adventure, but interesting. One that it kind of doesn't fit in any one of my other bookshelf tours, really, so I just decided to show that off here. Now, someone who maybe Wheatley was inspired by, as well as Robert E. Howard and several other writers, I'm sure, is Sax Rohmer, who wrote several Fu Manchu novels. I have a couple more back in the States. I have for sure Drums of Fu Manchu, Daughter of Fu Manchu, with some cool covers. This is a reprinting from the, what was this, from the 90s? Zebra Books, 85, the year I graduated from high school. This is The Insidious Dr. Fu Manchu. Now these, of course, are Yellow Peril novels, probably quite politically incorrect these days, but they're kind of, really kick-ass adventure books in the classic old school style. He's the embodiment of terror, danger, and the macabre, but he's met his match in Nayland Smith. Sir Nayland Smith of Scotland Yard fights against Fu Manchu as an evil genius trying to disrupt things in the Western world. And this is a fun series. There are several of these. I don't know, they don't have a list of the other ones here. And of course, this is over 112 years old. It was first published in 1913. So you can imagine the world was a very different place back then. But you can maybe accept that they'd have this Yellow Peril stuff going on in the early teens of the 20th century. But there were still, during the pulp era in the 40s, there were still plenty of these Yellow Peril stories being published in the pulps. So it took a while, I guess, during World War II, that might have had a resurgence. Anyway, Fu Manchu is a Chinese criminal mastermind, and he's got a sexy and extremely deadly and sadistic daughter. Thus the Daughter of Fu Manchu title there. So I'll just read a little blurb here to give you a little sense of this. To London he came, driving death before him like the swirling fog which for eons encompassed the ancient city. A specter of evil, his ageless ambition swept him closer to the heinous goal, dominion over the West, and those who knew him bowed to the name of Fu Manchu. But there was a man, one of endless resources and courage, who knew the East and its deadly secrets as few Westerners can. His name is Nayland Smith, and he had followed the shadow of Fu Manchu out of the sun-baked deserts of the Orient, home to England, where the deadly doctor's foolproof plan had already claimed the lives of 2 men. Smith could not allow himself to become its next victim. And of course, similar to Holmes and Watson, which, Romer does borrow a little bit of that for his heroes, Sir Nayland Smith has a close right-hand man, Dr. Petrie, working with him. Anyway, fun series of books if you can, go with, you just have to kind of go with what was happening at the time and what was acceptable at the time. If that kind of thing bothers you, then of course you can give this series a pass. But if you like fun, pulpish adventure, those are a lot of, a good time for sure. All right, now this one I've had for a long, long time, and I remember finding this in my elementary school, one of my teachers' classrooms, homerooms, library, and checked it out then. And then I had to get a copy of my own when I came across it on one of my book trawls when I was a younger person. I was overjoyed to find it, and that is Great Tales of Action and Adventure with the Richard Powers cover, one of his better covers as far as I'm concerned. Now this has this is a fun little Dell collection. It's only 35 cents originally. And it has a list of the stories on the back with, I guess you could say that's kind of a wraparound cover there of a sort. Now, these stories aren't in the order that they appear in the book, the way they're listed here on the back, but it gives you kind of the range of the 12 writers that they chose. Now, some of these, they're listed maybe in the order of being most well known, working down to some of the people who are unknown these days. But some of the stories here, the writers may not be so famous for anything else, but they're definitely famous for these stories. So what we have here, we have The Bamboo Trap by Robert S. Lemon, and that's a really cool story about a man dealing with falls in a cave and is attacked by a bunch of huge spiders. That's a lot of fun. The very famous and much anthologized Leiningen versus the Ants by Carl Stevenson. We have a Father Brown story, The Blue Cross by G.K. Chesterton. Now you might think, what's a classic detective story doing in a tale of action and adventure and suspense collection? But this one is how Father Brown converts. Basically, he encounters for the first time his frenemy, who becomes a close friend after he's reformed, the thief Flambeau, the international kind of art and jewel thief Flambeau. Father Brown, if anyone knows that character, is a kind of humble Catholic priest who's also got a genius for solving crimes. We have then another, perhaps one of the most anthologized stories ever for this kind of adventure tale, and that's The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell. So The Most Dangerous Game is about a pretty tough big game hunter type of guy named Rainsford, who is one of the few survivors of a shipwreck on this isolated island, and he washes up on the shore and is rescued. Basically goes to this estate on the island owned by this man named Count Zaroff, who treats him to a good meal and a soft bed, but then tells him in the morning, early next morning, he's, because he's heard of Rainsford and his reputation, and he's excited to hunt him all around his home. There's trophies of past hunts of animals, but he wants to hunt the greatest and most cunning of all animals, humans, and he proceeds to give Rainsford a slight, lead to get through the jungle. Then Count Zaroff goes in hot pursuit of Rainsford with his dogs, his rifle, and one of his servants to track Rainsford down. And it has one of the coolest endings and last lines in any short story you're going to read. That's an excellent, excellent story. Then it goes to The Fourth Man by John Russell. The Interlopers by Saki, H.H. Munro. Saki was a famous short story writer, many of them with tales with a sting in them. The Adventure of the Dancing Men, a Sherlock Holmes mystery story, mystery and adventure by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe. Rescue Party by Arthur C. Clarke, which you might think, well, that's interesting. What's that doing in an adventure book? But it's a science fiction adventure tale, I guess, that they decided to include in here. We have August Heat by William Fryer Harvey. Now, I'm sure I've read that in the past, but I can't recall what that one's about. To Build a Fire by Jack London, and it finishes with a story simply called Action by C.E. Montague. So this is a fun little book, and highly recommend it, packed full of adventure. Then I have a more modern one. This is from a very well-known literary figure, Michael Chabon, who's written lots of, best-selling literary novels like The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. And this one is his kind of homage to, I guess, the kind of exotic adventure fiction of someone like Talbot Mundy or Robert E. Howard, I suppose. And this is Gentlemen of the Road. And this is a really cool one. It's got, it's a pretty short novel. Here's Mr. Chabon himself. And it's got interior art by Gary Gianni. Gotta love it when there's some actual illustrations in a book. Right? There's quite a few of these. And the style is distinctly old-fashioned and fun. No, fantasy elements, just straight adventure. And a picaresque swashbuckling adventure, says the Washington Post book world. And of course, some blurbs, like is the habit with most modern-ish novels. Lots of praise for the novel. As just a fun slice of adventure. He's also, of course, Michael Chabon wrote Wonder Boys and Summerland and the Yiddish Policemen's Union, etc. And this one, again, has a nice map here. Okay, so I'll just read you again a little bit from the back so you know what it's about. They're an odd pair, rail-thin, black-clad Zelikman, a moody physician, and ex-soldier Amram, a gray-haired, quick-witted giant of a man. Brothers under the skin, comrades in arms, they make their rootless way through the Caucasus Mountains circa AD 950, surviving as blades and thieves for hire, and as practiced bamboozlers, cheerfully separating the gullible from their money. But when they are dragooned into service for a prince of the Khazar Empire, they find themselves in the half-willing generals in a full-scale revolution. On a road paved with warriors and whores, evil emperors and extraordinary elephants, secrets, swordplay, and such stuff as the grandest adventures are made of. Very fun read, this one. Then I have a collection, in the mid-2010s or early 2010s, some small presses, like in this case Altus Press, reprinted a bunch of cool and lesser known pulp stories and pulp collections. Now this is one, and unfortunately there was never a volume 2 as far as I've been able to find. This is volume 1, From Deep Waters, The Complete Adventures of the Major by L. Patrick Green. Now, what is the Major? I first came across the Major in this wonderful Otto Penzler Big Book of Adventure Stories collection, which has a story of the Major. I thought that story was so cool and so fun that as soon as I saw that there was this there's this edition, this collection of those stories, then I was all over that. Now, I never did get some of the other cool Altus Press pulp tie-ins. There's a bunch of them, and most of them are still available. This has an introduction by Ed Hulse. And it also has a glossary of terms and some letters and responses from L. Patrick Green to his readers from the pulps. So the character of the Major, I'll talk about him more in a moment, but these stories were first published in the pulp Adventure before moving on to another pulp short stories. And I think there were over 50 or so of these stories published in the pulps. There are only a dozen of these stories in here, so it would have taken at least another, 3 volumes to get them all in. Sadly, no more have been forthcoming. But The long-awaited and much-beloved series from the pages of short stories is finally collected in order and with a plethora of bonus material. Join Aubrey St. John Major, aka The Major, and his faithful companion Jim the Hottentot on their adventures across the diamond country of Africa. This collection includes the first 12 stories uncut and with all the original illustrations, along with Green's correspondence and an article by Archibald Bittner on the author. Capped with a career-spanning introduction by pulp historian Ed Holst, this is a collection decades in the making. So these are really cool adventure stories. The Major is a super tough guy, but he presents himself as a sort of Bertie Wooster, kind of buffoonish British upper-class type. I say, what? But he's actually got a mind like a steel trap, and he's resourceful and tough as can be, and tracks down evildoers, criminals across the subcontinent, the lower, usually South Africa and that Rhodesia and around there, with his trusty and very tough and smart and resourceful as well pal, Jim the Hottentot. The Hottentot was he's basically a tribe, an African tribe, and he is faithful friend and assistant to, not treated like a slave, treated on a very equal footing by the Major, who shows very little of his fellow countrymen's imperialist and racist attitudes to the various tribes he comes across. He's quite an interesting character for the time, and the adventures are a lot of fun and full of hairy situations with wild beasts and evil men and, twists in the tale, etc. Here's a picture of the writer, L. Patrick Green, dressed up, who spent a lot of time in Africa, so he knows of what he writes. And there's some cool little illustrations through here. Let's see if I can find a good one. They're reproduced from the pulps, I believe. There are not a lot of them, but there are some. A little crocodile there. Several rendezvous with crocodiles and other wild beasts of Africa, but it's mostly focused on the Major going up against some wild and nasty piece of work humans. Pretty much all Westerners. There he is there. He's presented fairly young in this book. And the introduction by Ed Holst is full of lots of good information. So I highly recommend that. This edition published in 2012 by Altus Press. Very cool collection. I'd like to finish up with a couple of books written by Arthur Conan Doyle. I know everyone just thinks of him chiefly as the writer of Sherlock Holmes and creator of Sherlock Holmes, which is a monumental achievement for sure, and what he is most well known for. But he wrote lots of different kinds of stories, boxing stories, historical adventures, of which he was the most proud. Some science fiction and fantasy tales, and horror stories. This is a Wordsworth Classics edition of all the Professor Challenger stories written by Arthur Conan Doyle, The Lost World, and other stories. Now, The Lost World, of course, is one of the more famous non-Sherlock Holmes stories or novels from Arthur Conan Doyle, and Professor Challenger is probably his most noteworthy second-tier character. Professor Challenger is a big, bearded, stocky, a genius, basically, who's got a massive ego but can usually walk the walk, and he has low tolerance for fools and people who waste his time. And The Lost World is, of course, him and three other gentlemen's adventures to Maple White Land, this kind of lost plateau in South America, in the jungles of South America, where they find dinosaurs and ape men and all sorts of cool things. Very, very great and fun novel. So this Wordsworth Classics edition was published in 1995, I believe. And it includes The Lost World, of course. The main cast of characters from The Lost World reunite for a couple of these stories. The Poison Belt, which is probably about 60-page novelette. Then one that could be classed as a novel, a short novel, The Land of Mist. Now this one came out after Arthur Conan Doyle, whose son died in World War One, became infatuated with spiritualism and a strong believer and proponent of ghosts and spirits, contacting spirits after they were dead. So the basis of the story kind of shifts a bit from more scientific realm, as was known at the time, to a more supernatural, spiritualistic side, and that's what The Land of Mist gets details. Then there's a couple of really cool Professor Challenger short stories at the end, and I think they only feature his friend, the narrator of the stories, Malone, the journalist. We have The Disintegration Machine and When the World Screamed, which was a story of humans drilling into the earth and causing some issues, and Professor Challenger trying to stop that from happening. Nice collection of those Professor Challenger stories. He's quite a cool character. And then I have the original novel, The White Company, that historical adventure novel, swashbuckling adventure when a young man joins a group of troops heading out on the Crusades, a troop led by Sir Nigel, The White Company. I have a nice, cool hardback version of that in my collection, but I don't have it here with me to show you. But I do have the kind of prequel novel, Sir Nigel. Now, Sir Nigel is one of the main characters in The White Company. He's kind of a small but gallant and extremely brave fellow with a not particularly handsome wife, which is funny touch in the very likable, but unlike the usual "oh, she's so beautiful" sort of thing, she's more of just a stout woman made of strong character. But Sir Nigel is a strong, prominent character in The White Company, and that White Company was a pretty successful historical novel for Arthur Conan Doyle, and I believe he named it as his favorite work. And Sir Nigel, he went back and wrote, about Sir Nigel as a younger man getting in adventures. Sir Nigel was originally published by John Murray in 1906. This edition is from 1965. And just to give you a little idea of the setting and the story, Edward III and the French wars of the 14th century are brought into vivid life in this inspiring story of military prowess, conquest, and adventure. Nigel Loring, the last of his race, has always wished to imitate the bold exploits of his ancestors, and a visit to his family home by the king and his court gives him the chance. Before leaving for France as squire to Sir John Chandos, Nigel made a lover's vow that he would only claim the Lady Marilyn Buttesthorn when he had accomplished 3 noble deeds. The story of how he kept this vow makes a stirring and exciting chronicle. Sir Nigel's further exploits are recounted in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's other famous romance of the Middle Ages, The White Company. I'd like to wrap up with one of the kind of founders of adventure writing and grand adventure, and that's H. Rider Haggard. Now, I know Andrea at Infinite Text has recently completed reading King Solomon's Mines. It's been a long-time favorite of mine. I have several editions. I must have got a duplicate here. I have 2 or 3 probably back home in the States, but I think I first bought this Penguin edition, Penguin Classics edition, here in Japan several years back. And then I must have forgotten that I had it because I ordered the Oxford Classics edition here. Now, this one's a little smaller text, and so it looks thinner than the Penguin Classics edition, but this has lots of notes, whereas I don't believe the Oxford Classics, Oxford Classics has notes as well, so annotated. And this Penguin one has a preface by Giles Foden, and the Oxford World Classics is edited and has an introduction and notes by Roger Luckhurst. So I prefer the cover of this one to this one. This one's not a particularly memorable cover. And I have a very cool little small hardback version of this, as well as a combination novel that has also Allan Quatermain and She in it. And that's a fabulous adventure story, and of course H. Rider Haggard's most famous work, but he has a lot of other works as well. And I mentioned She, and of course there's several Allan Quatermain adventures, including Allan's Wife, which I have an interesting trade paperback from the early 80s, I believe, in my collection, but I don't have it here with me. And then I have this nice Del Rey version of She and Allan. Allan Quatermain meets Aisha, she who must be obeyed, the beautiful white imperious ruler of a lost race somewhere in the African mountains there. And this is the life and love story of She Who Must Be Obeyed, Volume 2. Watcher by night, he was the great white hunter in a land of 1,000 perils, a man known to witch doctors and cannibals as one to be feared. That's Allan Quatermain they're talking about. But now, spurred on by the fiery vision of the dwarf Zikali, he sought answers to his future on a journey of uncountable dangers to the lost land of Kor, where reigned the immortal She. Accompanied by Umslopogus, outcast from the people of the Axe, and by his faithful companion Hans, Allan Quatermain began his extraordinary adventure, his search for the legendary White Witch, whose knowledge was more than human. But only when he found her and gazed for the first brief moment on her soul-searing beauty did he come to know the true meaning of mortal terror. Cool. And another one, and I believe this one is in Michael K. Vaughan and his pal, his mummy pal Roger's cheap old book club, People of the Mist, The People of the Mist by Allan Quatermain. And here's another fun Del Rey edition. This Del Rey edition has seen a little better days. It's got a little water damage, so it's a little wrinkly. I got this one pretty cheap. This one's not starring any Allan Quatermain or anyone from his series there. Into the deepest and darkest depths of Africa they trekked to find the People of the Mist. A strange black dwarf who swam like an otter and fought like a tiger. A bold Englishman whose quest for precious gems brought him a wife he dared not love. A vengeful old woman who knew she could save them or destroy them. And the incredibly beautiful Juana, who would use all her earthly charms to impersonate a goddess in a land of bloody rituals and hideous terrors. Bound together by oaths of love and vows of hate, they crossed a continent of myriad dangers to find the lost civilization of the People of the Mist and to seek out the treasure that would forge their destinies. I believe this one was published around 1894. So again, at the end of the 19th century is when Rider Haggard did most of his work, and into the early 20th. So yes, outdated imperialist and racist attitudes, I'm sure, in these, although there are plenty of, three-dimensional characters, I think, of the African tribal people in these novels, as well as the white characters. But H. Rider Haggard was a product of his time, so if that kind of thing bothers you, again, duly warned. But you will find lots of robust adventure here. Now, Haggard wrote many novels. He was quite popular. His fame brought him, the fame from King Solomon's Mines made him, and She made him, a household name for many years. He's kind of been somewhat forgotten these days, other than maybe his two most noted works. His other works are worth reading too, and People of the Mist looks like good fun. So that is my little grab bag of adventure novels. I hope you found something there of interest, and I hope you feel free to pick these up at some point and read them yourself. And if you do, or have read some of these, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.